There have always been reports of people going missing after vacationing at an island off the coast of California. Reports say that once the captain of the boats arrived to pick them up, there were only the sounds of screams and giggles coming from the woods. I always assumed that these were just rumors, legends, and hoaxes, but now I know how wrong I really was. The events that took place on that hellish island have scarred me for life. This is my story. "Come on, honey, we're gonna be late for that boat ride to the island," I said to my wife as I tapped my fingers against a small table near the door as I checked the time on my watch. "Just a few more minutes," she shouted. I smiled as I watched the clock tick on. After about 10 minutes, I was finally tired of waiting for her, so I shouted, "We're gonna be late if we don't leave right now." She walked down the stairs carrying her purse, wearing a bright red dress, and she would smile when looking at you. "Okay, now we can go. Don't get your panties in a bunch. We'll make it in time, don't worry." We hurried to our car and got in. I started the engine and drove us to the restaurant, which was placed next to a dock that overlooked a beautiful dark swamp. When we had finally arrived to the restaurant, as I expected, we missed our reservation. We still managed to get our seats aboard the floating restaurant. I apologized to the waiter for how late we were and ordered a small portion of fish and chips. The waiter accepted my request. My wife ordered the same meal with a glass of wine. While waiting for our meal, it was eventually time for the boat to make its way through the dark, murky waters into the island. We felt the barge thrust as the engine started. We sat relaxed on the boat, heading to the famous Island of Dolls. We were so happy together. Everything about that moment was perfect. We dined under the faint glow of the moonlight as our boat slowly drifted its way through the dark and lonely swamp. But we were happy because we had each other. Later on, we went under the deck and fell asleep in each other's arms, and that's when I had an intimidating dream. I was with my wife. We sat for a while just staring at each other. She started to cry and then walked away into total darkness. I blinked, and when I reopened my eyes, she was replaced with a doll that had a malicious, stitched frown on its face. The doll was also disfigured and mutilated. I couldn't stop staring at it. Something about the way it looked just made me continue to stare. The dream lasted for what felt like days, and when I woke up screaming. Soaked with sweat from my night terror, I sat up in bed, motionless. The dream was so vivid and just awful. I didn't think I'd be able to fall back asleep. I lay awake in bed, caressing my wife's long, dark, flowing hair as the cruise softly and silently drifted through the pitch-black waters of that swamp. I held my wife close for the rest of the night. Eventually, I did fall back asleep. I woke with a jolt from my wife. "We're here," she said happily. We got organized and dressed. I remember my dream from the previous night and shivered. Finally, it was time to enter the Island of Dolls. I was a bit shocked when I first saw the island. The way the dolls just hung there. They looked like they were staring at you. But the thing that scared me most was how lonely the island was. Even with the dolls and the people, it still felt lonely. I was filled with fear and anguish as I watched the old and tattered dolls sway in the soft breeze. Something about the dolls here was odd, to say the least. It felt like they were alive at one point. I felt as if they contained the trapped souls of a person in pain. I would have left the island right then and there, but I sucked it up and continued on with the tour group. I noticed something odd. All the people, even my wife, seemed to be in a trance. I hadn't talked to her since we had gotten off the boat. So I asked her, "So, how are you enjoying the tour?" She didn't reply. So I asked her again, "Are you enjoying the tour?" Still no reply. My heart sank and the air fell silent. The wind stopped blowing and the birds stopped chirping. Terrified, I grabbed my wife and shook her, with no response. I closed my eyes and pinched myself, saying, "This can't be real, this can't be real," over and over and over again until I felt safe. I then opened my eyes and saw a thick black mist circling me slowly, coming closer and closer. In shock, I stood still. The mist was coming nearer and nearer until it hit me. And once it touched me, I reopened my eyes and it seemed as if everything was back to normal. My wife then turned to me and said in a comforting voice, "Is everything okay, honey?" I once again sucked up my fear and continued on, replying to my wife, "Yeah, everything's great." "All right, I thought for a second that you were a little afraid of these dolls." I just laughed softly and said nothing. The tour group continued through the dense, swampy island without event for quite a while until my wife grabbed me by the arm and said, "Let's leave this stupid tour. Let's have some real fun." I smiled and laughed. My wife's adventurous spirit was something I loved most about her. We walked off alone into the forest swamp. Just the two of us. When we were alone, I felt closer to her than I had any other time during our relationship. Everything was great. We were laughing and telling each other stories the whole time we were in that forest. We were truly in love, and I felt happy when I was with her. My wife laughed and grabbed one of the dolls off of the tree and said jokingly, "How do people think this is scary?" I hesitantly laughed at her joke. She then threw the doll to the ground. Just before it landed, she once again fell into a trance-like state. Filled with fear, I shook her and yelled, "Don't mess with me!" Just then I noticed behind her was that dark mist from before. "We have to go right now," I shouted, but I was paralyzed to my spot. The mist behind her was swirling around in the shape of some kind of humanoid. While screaming for my wife to run, I shouted at the creature, "Don't touch her!" The creature stopped moving and disbanded into the air. It then reformed right behind me and whispered into my ear, with a voice straight from hell, "Her soul is mine now." I shouted as loudly as I could, "Fuck you!" Just then the creature moved over to my wife and pulled her into the deep, murky waters of the swamp. I collapsed to the ground, feeling defeated and angry, when behind me I heard a faint sound of children laughing. The sound grew louder and louder until it was deafening. I screamed in pain as the ear-piercing laughter caused me great pain, and then all of a sudden the laughter stopped. And out of the dark, hellish waters floated a doll. The doll was wearing the same vibrant colors as my wife and had a deep, malicious smile displayed across its face. I screamed in pain as I knew my one true love was gone forever. There was no heaven for her. Her soul would rot inside of this hellish doll for eternity. I collapsed to the ground and wept for hours. Then the mist returned. It had come back for me. "Just take me!" I yelled. Nothing happened. The mist was trying to form some sort of shape. I could eventually make out what it was, a finger pointing at a tree I had not noticed before. "Just kill me now," I demanded. Nothing. I decided to look at the tree the finger was pointing at. Bizarrely, there, hanging from a noose, was a doll with the same dress my wife had been wearing. I hope you ghouls enjoyed this creepy story with the dolls. I know it's kind of shorter than usual, but I didn't really have a lot of time this week, so I apologize for that. But as always, ghouls, the last video will be on the top left, the next video will be in the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen, as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.